I'm happy to welcome our two presenters for this session. The esteemed presenters, I should say, are Ian Cortez of British Council and Andrew Stokes of Clarity English. And also we have Puyi, who is joining us as well. So guys, maybe you can turn your cameras on and just acknowledge your presence. Andrew, there. Hi, Andrew. And Ian, nice to see you here as well. And we have Puyi as well. Okay, great. Excellent, guys. Okay, so we're on a rather tight schedule, so I won't belabor the introductions too much. So I'll just hand over to you guys, and you can get us underway. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Chris, and thanks all for attending. So it's Friday afternoon, and over the next 20 minutes or so, Ian and I are going to tell you a story. So let me start by setting the scene. So imagine that you are a British Council manager in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. That's a picture of the council in Riyadh. And you've been working for months to secure a contract with a prestigious company in Saudi Arabia. We're going to call it the Gulf Transportation Company, GTC, for privacy reasons. Okay, this company wishes to employ 50 graduate engineers this year. So that gives you an idea of its size. And it's received over 2,000 applicants. And that gives you an idea of its prestige and its high profile. And some of these applicants are in Saudi Arabia, but others are finishing off their degrees in the UK and right across the US, from the East Coast to the West Coast. Okay, so like many large companies, prior to the face-to-face interviews, GTC will administer a battery of sort of preliminary tests. So these are maths tests, logic and reasoning tests, and also English tests. And for the English, they will only accept applicants who are C2 in a CEFR scale. So you, as British Council manager, have proposed APTIS, and GTC has agreed. The overseas applicants will fly back to Saudi Arabia to take the test. Everything, all the arrangements are settled by February this year, by February 2020, and the tests are going to take place in April 2020. Then disaster strikes. By March, COVID-19 is stretching its tentacles across the world, and countries have started locking down. So the original APTIS plan will no longer work, but equally, it's not an option to let down such an important client. So Ian, what are you going to do?
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good afternoon to all the participants here today with us. What we needed was a 100% online test with CEFR output. Obviously, it has to be accurate and reliable, and it needs straightforward and simple administration. We knew about the dynamic placement test published by Clarity because we have used it in a number of projects around the world. We had confidence in the test, which was devised by TELC Language Tests, the European Union language testing experts. Also, the British Council has had a close relationship with Clarity since the 1990s, in particular with Road to IELTS, which has run tens of millions of sessions. The challenge is this: with Clarity based in Hong Kong in the East, the company and the British Council admin in Riyadh in the middle, and the test takers ranging as far as California in the West. So you can just see here a representation in front of your screen, and the UK in the North. Could we run a successful test in a limited time frame across 17 time zones? Add to this that the lines of communication are complex. human resources at GTC interact with the test takers. GTC interacts with the British Council for all aspects of test administration. British Council interacts with Clarity, which will have a dedicated member of staff, Dora Chang, for this project. Well, it's difficult to understand even when I say it here, and it was much more challenging at the time. So how did it work out? Let's look at 3 aspects. Andrew, what about test security?
Okay, thank you, Ian. Yeah, well, as you will all be aware as testing enthusiasts, clients often take a very black and white approach to test security. So as we know, they often won't accept the validity of a test result unless the test itself has been properly invigilated. So this was potentially an interesting challenge. I mean, if we can cast our minds back, just 10 months. Now we are all familiar with the term online proctoring, but even back in March, nobody had really ever heard of it. So we were faced with 2 questions. Firstly, what options did we have for security? That's the more practical question. And secondly, how do we categorize the test in terms of security, in terms of stakes, high stakes or low stakes? And that's a more theoretical question. So let's look at the practical side first. And basically we came to the conclusion that our options were kind of limited to non-existent. For reasons we needn't go into here, it's quite difficult to cheat the dynamic placement test. But of course, there's nothing to stop you getting someone else to do it for you. We'd recently implemented a fairly simple system to solve this problem in a project with Brunel University, which is, as you probably know, an engineering university in London. And they wanted to find a straightforward way of testing applicants in the absence of IELTS, which at that time, back in March, had totally shut down. So the system we came up with was to set up test takers in a Zoom meeting. So they would position their phones. So we've got a photo of the way it works here. So you can see that she's positioned her phone so that she can be observed while she takes the test on another device. So she's taking the test on a desktop computer. When the Zoom meeting starts, the invigilator in London checks the identity of the candidates and then can randomly observe them as they take the test at home to make sure there's no jiggery-pokery going on. Okay, this system was successful with that client and Brunel University was happy, but it was significantly different from the GTC project. So the Brunel project never had more than 10 test takers at any one time, and they were all in the same country and the same time zone. The country was China. Whereas the GTC project had potentially 2,000 test takers spread across the world. So it was very difficult to see how that could work. So we were effectively out of options, but was invigilation actually really necessary? So this takes us to question 2. How do we categorize the test? How important actually was it to monitor these job applicants? So in simple terms, let's ask whether this is a high stakes test. And the interesting answer is yes and no. For the test takers, of course, it was. So in this case, if a test taker fails to achieve a C2, then that was the end of it. It was game over. They would have lost the job. But for the employer, this was not a high stakes test. In this, I mean, it's different from, say, IELTS. So in IELTS, if a candidate cheats their way to an IELTS 7 when they're really only an IELTS 5.5, and if on the basis of this they end up at a UK university, then there's a real problem. for both sides, for both the student and for the university. But the GTC case is different. So in the GTC case, not getting a C2 would filter the applicant out, but getting a C2 would not qualify the applicant for the job. It would simply keep them in the pipeline. And if they had in fact cheated, they would be caught out at a later stage, most obviously in the face-to-face interview. So there was no risk that if a candidate cheated, there would be serious consequences. And it was not, therefore, a high-stakes test from the client's point of view. But would the client appreciate that? So as it turned out, we were very lucky to be dealing with a highly sophisticated HR team at GTC. And they understood that test security should, in fact, be calibrated to the function of the test. So they accepted that this is not a black and white picture like the one we showed earlier, but perhaps more like this, with different shapes and multiple shades of grey. And as a result, the client was quite happy from both a practical and a theoretical standpoint to let the test takers self-regulate. So that was challenge number 1 taken care of. What about running the test itself, Ian?
So normally with DPT or dynamic placement test, the admin is pretty simple. You set up all the test details on a screen like this, what you're seeing now on your screen. Then you import the test taker's email addresses from an Excel file or similar and put them into a group. Finally, you will assign the test takers you have imported to the test you have created. The system will then email them all the details, the URL, the test time, and the confirmation of their username and password. Simple. However, in this case, it couldn't work like that because the HR department, the Human Resources Department, was not able, or at least not willing, to release the email addresses of the applicants. So the process had to be more complex. And as we know, the more complex the system, the more likely it is to go wrong, as we were going to find out. Luckily, we had 2 very competent people working on this, Ether Diab at the British Council and Dora Chang from Clarity. They worked with GTC HR to devise a system of unique anonymous IDs, each matched with a password and cross-referenced to a test taker's real identity in terms of their name and email. This would enable HR to email the test details to each applicant before the test. After the test, using the same system in reverse, it would be straightforward to marry up the test results with each candidate in an Excel file. What could go wrong? Well, in fact, this all went very smoothly and nothing did go wrong with this part of the process. The test was duly set up to run between 9th and 11th of April 2020, and the candidates were informed. But late in the evening of 11th April, there was a panicked phone call from GTC to the British Council. They had calls and emails saying the test had closed earlier than they thought, and some of the applicants were unable to get in. They'd gone back to their invitation emails and realized that they had put the wrong times in the emails. They acknowledged it was their fault, but was there anything that the British Council could do to save the day? It was actually no bad thing that this happened because we were able to show them excellent customer service. Changing the end date of the test is a simple matter, and by 8 o'clock the following morning, we had contacted Clarity, and they had extended it to a new end date matching that in the GTC email. Actually, now we have a little more experience with the test. We could have done it ourselves within 5 minutes. The result of all this is that the client was extremely happy. Not only had we set up an efficient admin system, but we had also saved from them the consequences of an embarrassing mistake. I'd also like to highlight one additional benefit of this system. Not only had we set up efficient admin system, but remember, at the beginning, Andrew said that the overseas applicants were going to fly to Saudi Arabia to take the test. Just think of how wasteful that could have been. New York to Riyadh is 6,526 miles, or 13,052 miles return. It is certain that by using this 100% online test, we have saved hundreds of thousands of unnecessary air miles, probably millions. That is perhaps 20 to 30,000 tons of CO2. Now, this may not seem relevant to testing, but surely it relates exactly with what we were talking about earlier, the importance of calibrating the test security and making responsible decisions around what we find. So in this case, one of the decisions was that we didn't need invigilation, and an additional outcome was avoiding a significant environmental cost. Okay, Andrew, let's complete this talk by looking at the test output.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah. There we go. Okay. So let me switch the video on. Okay, good. Thanks, Ian. Yeah. So to conclude, first of all, and most importantly, GTC got exactly what they wanted. In terms of operations, the test was overwhelmingly successful, as we can see from this first chart. So 2,007 candidates took the test, 1,980 completed it successfully, 23 signed in and then gave up, 3 took the test but did not complete enough answers to get a grade, and there was just one error. So that's a technical success rate of 99.95%. Now we can see from this next chart that they were able to whittle down about 2,000 applicants to the 385 who achieved a C2. So not only do we save all of that carbon dioxide that Ian was talking about, but removing 1,600 odd applicants from the process represents, of course, a massive saving in cost. I mean, that's even more dramatic when you consider that each dynamic placement test only costs $5 US. So for GTC, for the Gulf Transportation Company, that's the end of the story, and they walked away as a very satisfied British Council customer. And the managers responsible were able to rightly congratulate themselves on a job well done. But the story doesn't end there for the rest of us, those of us who are interested in testing and assessment. There is data here to make the most jaded testing specialist salivate. Let's look at 3 data sets and consider what we could do with them. So I'm sure looking at this graph here that you've noticed something slightly odd. If we compare this with a normal distribution curve, the number of C2s at the bottom seems too high. So why might this be? I would postulate that there is a correlation between the CEFR level and the geographical location of the test taker. So I would suggest that the seemingly abnormally high level of C2s is explained by the cohort that has studied in the US or the UK. Perhaps they've studied there since secondary school. And how could we test this? Well, we know the IP address of every single test taker, so we can run queries to see if there are correlations between the CEFR level achieved and the country where the test was taken. And then, of course, if we wanted to, we could take it further. Perhaps we could see whether correlations exist between urban and rural areas within Saudi Arabia itself. And perhaps GTC would find this information useful in their next recruitment round. And then, you know, if we're interested, we could do exactly the same thing for the time at which the test was taken. Who performs better, the night owl or the lark? Adjusted for time zone, of course, or does it not make any difference? Okay, one more chart. Here's an interesting one. For 99.8% of the test takers, we know which device they used. So in this chart, it's broken down quite crudely into Mac, Windows, and phone. But we can get very much more granular if we want to. And in fact, we have researched other data sets to see whether there is a difference in performance depending on device. And we found that overall, there isn't. But within that overall conclusion, there are some interesting tidbits. So we find counterintuitively that test takers complete reading items marginally quicker on mobile. But given that they're working on a much smaller screen and having to swipe between text and questions, why might that be? So perhaps further room for research there. Okay, there's lots more work that could be done on this, and we have other comparable data sets too, both from British Council projects and from other projects. So if there's anybody out there in the audience who'd like to do some research on these data sets, then please do get in touch with us. Okay, finally, let's wrap up now. What are the main conclusions? Number one, the British Council and Clarity were able to draw on an effective long-term partnership to arrive at an outcome that neither of us could have done alone. So the success of the managers working in a fast-moving, complex environment, we mustn't understate that. Secondly, with GTC's cooperation, we were able to effectively calibrate security to achieve multiple benefits: cost and time savings, and even environmental benefits. Thirdly, we've harvested a wealth of exciting data, and that can further contribute to the relationship with the client. And finally, cast your mind back to the picture that I painted at the beginning. As a manager, you have overcome the challenges, you've solved the problems, and you've ended up with a very satisfied customer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Ian, for that very interesting presentation. We do have a question, a couple of questions. I think the first one was kind of answered already, more or less, but the second one is this. The question is, some people say that all forms of assessment, whether remote assessment or otherwise, are susceptible to cheating, and ultimately that the best solution might be to create assessments where security is less important and cheating is allowed. How much do you agree with this?
Ian, do you have something to say on that?
Yes, sure, but go ahead, Andrew, you can go first.
Yes, I mean, I think this, yeah, I mean, yes and no, I think. I mean, you know, I think this proved that security is not a black and white issue, and that you have to look at what the test is being used for to decide how secure you need it to be. I mean, if we look at this in another context, if you're taking a coronavirus test, you think you want that to be pretty secure. You want to know whether you don't want people cheating on that. So that, and likewise, the example that I gave earlier about IELTS, if people are allowed to cheat on that, then there's significant consequences on both sides, both for the receiving organisation and for the test taker. But something like this, I think, is a very interesting example of how we can put a little bit of confidence in the common sense of the test taker and allow them to make decisions. If they want to cheat, fine, you know, actually it's going to do you more harm than good. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the intelligence and the common sense of the test takers. Yeah. Ian?
Thank you, Andrew. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank whoever posed that question. I think I'd like to start by mentioning that security is oftentimes, well, in most cases, the bedrock of exams administration. So for example, in our experience at the British Council, of course, we value test security because in doing this, in not allowing people to cheat, in ensuring that everyone is able to have access to the test and get an accurate measurement of their language proficiency levels, we are ensuring that we are measuring what we want to measure. So if we are using an assessment for readiness at work or for student placement or in order to choose people who to promote in the organization, we will need to be sure that the people who took the exam do merit or do deserve this particular rating. In that regard, security is a very important safeguard for institutions. Now, I would also say that it's very important, and should institutions decide that it's less of an issue or it's less of a concern because of a host of different factors, then that's fine. But insofar as the experience of the British Council is concerned, security is something that's taken seriously, and security is one of the bedrock or foundations of the way we do assessments to enable or to create opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. We do have a couple minutes. If anyone has any more questions, I'm not sure if anyone has at the moment. I'll just allow for a few seconds here. Okay. In that case, I think we can bring the session to an end. Thank you very much again, Andrew Stokes and Ian Cortez. It was great to have you here today. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed the session. Right.